Hi, welcome to our latest Inquirer debate. Over the past 4 days, we've been debating whether the Internet of Things is an existential threat to those businesses slow to adopt it, or whether it's all just marketing hype. Today, we're going to dig deeper, and as well as hearing more from our debate speakers, we'll be sharing some of the reader comments we've received throughout the week, along with the final results of our poll. We'll also be launching some live polls throughout this debate, so you can get involved in the action too. I'm joined on today's panel by Roland Moore-Collier, John Leonard and Wael El-Rifai of Pentaho. And I'm now going to pass over to Roland, who's going to give us a summary of his argument.
Right, well, I'll be debating in favour of the Internet of Things and more precisely adopting it from now, really. Basically, I think there's lots of discussions about whether it's too early, whether it's been overhyped, but I'm very much of the opinion, no, the technology's there now. It might not be quite this magical interconnected web that we all think it is, but it's definitely, the Internet of Things is definitely a thing. You need to start adopting it now. You need to embrace it. You need to get involved. You need to look at how it works with your company. Otherwise, you're going to fall behind your rivals. And even if your rivals just happen to be your neighbour next door with a smart fridge and one of these Amazon home hubs, you've got to get in with it now. I suspect my colleague John is going to disagree with me.
You suspect rightly there, Roland. So you're saying that we should be all be adopting the Internet of Things. So my thing would be, what are you trying to sell me? The Internet of Things is such a broad area. It encompasses cloud computing, big data, sensors, wireless technology, artificial intelligence, robotics. Okay, goes on and on and on. So what are we actually talking about here? And I think we wouldn't be sitting here in this room today having this conversation if it weren't for Kevin Ashton, who was the engineer who in 1999 actually coined the phrase. It's a brilliant phrase, no doubt about that. But the whole thing is very immature. At the moment, it's a marriage of convenience. And it's a really bad marriage because lots of the different participants within this marriage don't even talk to each other. They don't even acknowledge that the others exist within the marriage. So that's why my position is, unless you have a real driving use case right now, it's best to wait another year or two, wait and see, wait for the technology to mature.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm Wael El-Rifai, I'm the Director of Enterprise Solutions at Pentaho. I've been working with data integration, data engineering, data science, machine learning, and Internet of Things for more than a decade now. And I would start by saying that everything we do, every piece of data that we get right now is already coming from a thing, right? So I think we should start by coming to an agreement. I think John got us part of the way there just now. What do we mean when we say Internet of Things? Do we mean the sensor technologies, the ability to capture the sensor data, the low-cost communication networks, the low-power networks, the computational capability, the advanced applied mathematics, the robotics? What is it we're talking about? Are we talking about all those things?
I think you always have to. I think there are many subcategories, and it's the same. You look at the cloud, you look at big data. It's all feeding and kind of coalescing into one big mess, which I guess is what the Internet of Things is.
Isn't it easy to say, what aren't we talking about?
Well, yeah, I'd agree with that.
So what's the part we're concerned about? What's the part that we're thinking is not mature about that?
I think it's the whole. I'm almost arguing in favour of John Nelson. It's the idea that there isn't a degree of interconnectivity between them, but I think the overall thing is that lack of maturity. But I'm beginning to think that we are slowly getting that idea where everything's being interconnected. It's not there yet, but there are networks of things, and there maybe are Internet of Things. I think the Internet of Things is effectively a network, a network of a network of things once it's fully realised. And we're not there, but we've got to start moving towards that idea. I think there are many subcategories, as you mentioned, and how the Internet of Things can be used. So maybe applying machine learning to a large area of networks.
Actually, let me start with something else then to kind of kick this off here. What is it that we want to get out of the Internet of Things? That'll actually probably help us define the whole value chain. What do we want to accomplish?
Well, the Internet of Things is an extension of big data technologies. So it's having huge data sets, having information coming from all over the place, combining it in real time in a meaningful way. I mean, that's what we want to do. This is going to depend. I'm arguing on Roland's side now. This is going to depend slightly on the sector. But say, for example, the obvious one is, say, manufacturing.
Okay.
So you're watching your production line for signs of failure, so before any human being would actually, predictive maintenance, exactly. Medicine's another one, you're monitoring people's vital signs, etc. So these are all use cases which, as you said before, are already there. They will expand, obviously they will. Again, on Roland's side, I think Gartner said that in this year, 30% more things will be connected than were last year. So we're talking like exponential change. So I'd never say that things aren't changing. I would say that you should be cautious because you were talking before about immaturity. A lot of it isn't mature. There's various communications protocols.
Sure.
Security standards are definitely not in place. We have to worry about personal data, privacy, all this sort of stuff. So it seems to me at the moment it's the marketing driving the use cases rather than the other way around, which is what it should be.
So my take on that is, I think, as you said, they are use cases, almost siloed use cases. I think where I would like to see the Internet of Things going, particularly as someone who would really like to see all this hype actually become a reality, is it's connecting it all together. So your healthcare, all the healthcare data and interconnectivity between wearable heart rate monitors, things, all those things kind of feed into maybe what the data your fridge is collecting on you with what you're eating. And so let's say you have a particular dietary plan for medical reasons or just overall healthcare reasons. Your fridge monitors what you're getting. Okay, not saying it controls what you're allowed to eat, because that's going to a very kind of big brother society that we might want to avoid. But it feeds into that, and maybe that connects back to your phone, which is your banking app on. It can work out what you're spending, your sort of where your weekly budget is going. Are you spending too much on food? Or are you spending too little on food and too much on, I don't know, Netflix or something like that? I think it's the idea of all this interconnectivity is what I want to see, which not just it improves businesses in terms of efficiency and supply chains, but society as a whole. Everything's connected and actually works together in a more efficient manner.
So you're talking about an interesting thing, which some companies, including the company I work for, call social innovation, right? These sort of changes that have societal wide impacts. But I think we have to stop here and think about what are we talking about exactly. So if we're talking about optimizing, say, traffic,
right?
What exactly do we want to optimize? Let's say we're optimizing traffic flow throughout the city.
Yeah.
But you know that when we make your traffic 2 minutes longer, we make yours 7 minutes shorter, right? There are going to be trade-offs like that. Or if you have autonomous cars, which are part of this Internet of Things, presumably one of the key parts. You know, if you have autonomous cars and an accident is inevitable, how do the cars make the decision? Either this car or this car is going to be in an accident. How do the cars take the decision? So my worry about the Internet of Things is that we can only think about it for really closed form, well understood problems, which is why I see it very easy to apply in places like factories, where what we want is predictive maintenance, schedule optimization, which is basically an optimization of what we call traveling salesman problem, or total asset optimization. Those make sense to me. But if we think of a much more complex world where we're talking about, you know, how do they decide which car is going to be late to work that day? Is it based on how much you earn? Do we want things decided that way? So I think the biggest problem we see in these things is not connecting them. Right? We can come up with protocols. I just don't know how we make the decisions on what we want to optimize.
I think the other thing that you're hitting on there is that we as consumers will be basically passive in this whole thing. We won't be able to turn the Internet of Things off like we can turn the internet off. We won't be able to block things tracking us like we can do with difficulty.
Why do you say that?
Because we can't walk down the street without our faces being photographed, without information being picked up on us. And it's really all about how that information is used. I guess we'll sort of go into this a little bit later on, you know, about the security and the privacy angle. But what you're talking about is coming out of this sort of very closed use case, which is quite easy to understand, to something which is really going to change life fundamentally when it does happen, and we have to get it right. You know, we can't sort of mess around with half measures, you know, about our personal identities and personal privacy, and just, you know, we want to be doing things in the world, not having the world doing things to us.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would agree with that. We do need to get it right, but then we come back to that stage of adoption, and I think for people to work out what they want to get, I think everyone needs to be involved, and I did approach it very much from businesses need to start looking into this, because really you can hear all the use cases, you can watch what other businesses are doing. But because different businesses have different business needs, it's the same as using anything between how you use cloud, how you consume data, how you collect data. It's always going to be your own way of doing things. So you need to start testing this.
Yeah, for a while it's going to be the same sectors that have adopted it already. It's manufacturing, retail, healthcare, agriculture.
Well, hold on. So we talk about predictive maintenance as I think most people think of it as the top use case in manufacturing for Internet of Things. Just to be clear, I mean, predictive maintenance has been around more than 70 years. I mean, we could probably argue it's been around thousands of years, but you can find textbooks in the oil and gas industry on maintenance of rotating shafts and wellheads and drill bits that are more than 70 years old. So it's not the end goal that we're trying to change. That goal is well understood, right? What is the big difference now? I think really it comes down to the computation power, because even the sensors have been on these devices for decades. Yeah. So I mean, in that case, I think we really are talking, and I think you focused on this. Business is really what you're thinking about now.
I think it's a mixture of all sorts of things. I mean, we look at businesses. Businesses need to start getting involved in it, or they'll get left behind. I think you need to work out how you can use this technology. Otherwise, your rivals. Again, you can look at, say.
So, what is the technology you're talking about, though, specifically?
Sensor technology, data collection technology, compute power, where you're kind of how you can distribute the computational power. Do you want to use fog networks? Do you want it all to be in one central database? Do you just want sensors? Again, how you secure it as well. Do you just secure the main system, or do you try and get security even on these thin clients? And I know there's a lot of advancement going on there. So I think everyone needs to start rethinking about it, because those that don't, so you're going to have, once Ocado, I go back to the example of them again, once you sort of start losing out on the idea that you don't have say the retailer who has all this interconnectivity and has an IoT platform which can just effectively automate a lot of their delivery of their food, compare it to maybe a service, say Tesco offers, and they don't have that automation. They're just still using vans with basic GPS systems and no kind of tracking or anything. I'm not saying Tesco does do that, but I'm using it just as a off the top of my head use case. They would fall behind their rivals. And I think someone's got to start looking into this.
You could say the same about any technology at any stage in history. Exactly the same argument could be made, and it would be true.
But I think, to a certain extent, I think people, you look at the cloud, for instance, and a lot of people, and still are, reticent of adopting the cloud. But there are companies that have gone full force with it and really kind of gone, right, let's shift our IT systems, and they are seeing marked differences, and the same as moving from paper-based system to digital.
Well, some are, some aren't. It depends how you do it.
From my experience and from what I've reported on, I'd say there's generally, as most people who've moved towards a cloud-based infrastructure have had marked business benefits and efficiency benefits and cost savings to some extent. Oh. And I think when we come to the IoT, I think you need to start looking into it. I'm not saying, and I think you said in your counter argument, you don't start sticking sensors in everything, including a dog, even though you can get wearables for dogs now. So you've got you can if you want.
On a dog rather than a dog.
But I think there's a case that if you need to start experimenting with this and seeing how it works for you. And then we go back to making sure we get the IoT right. And I think if everyone is holding back, saying, wait, let's see what happens, you've got everyone who's not making that move, which means no one's really working together to figure out what works at the early stages. And so we're not kind of working, getting it right from a kind of an early point. So you're going to get some people who are going to fly ahead of the IoT. They'll be the guys defining the standards and the way it should be used. Others are going to fall behind. Or they'll start adopting it, but in a different manner. You'll get this kind of gap, and maybe.
Do you think companies are holding back because they don't think there's value in it?
I think there's lots of companies who are looking into it, and I think they're worried about the investment side. And I think that then the whole narrative behind the IoT can be quite confusing, because you don't need to spend huge amounts of money. There's open source software out there.
Should be extremely low cost.
You use Raspberry Pis, can act as thin clients. You've got a huge amount of scope. You just need to start thinking about it.
Raspberry Pi is enormously expensive compared to some of the other things you could be doing out there.
But there's a huge amount of scope, and I think unless we, but society, businesses, even individuals, start looking at kind of how we can all use this technology that's on offer to us, then I think we're gonna fall apart, or we're gonna pull other people back down with us as well. I think there's so much potential here. The actual idea of this interconnected society, where data, and then you kind of work out, people will be maybe monitoring their phones and how early they actually need to leave or when they need to get to the cars, and then you can use all that data to work out, well, who gets priority on the roads. I think there's all sorts.
I'm not sure you can find any way of working that one out. I mean, if you're going to let markets solve that one, I think it's pretty scary.
It's sort of a leap of faith. I think when you talk about whether cars, who gets priority there, you can just look at the kind of London tube journeys. Really, a lot of trains are held to relieve congestion. If you happen
but
to
they're
be on
not
that
looking. That is not the Internet of Things.
No,
in the same way, right? They have some straightforward algorithm which does not have your personal, life taken into account.
I think that's
Internet of
what
Things
we've
it
got to
probably
work on.
would.
We've got to work on these systems, and I'm not saying, again, you don't need everything at this stage. I think we're past the early adoption stage. We don't need to have huge amounts of interconnectivity where everything is connected, but we need to start looking at how individual clusters of networks work, and then seeing how they connect, and people need to start looking at it and adopting it to then figure out so we do get it right. I think if you've got people staying back and saying, no, let's wait until there's this one kind of harmonious sort of platform that we have to adopt, then you're going to be left out. And the advantages that can be got out of this once it's fully realised fall behind, really.
On that point, Roland, I'm just going to launch our first reader poll, which asks, is your organisation currently implementing the Internet of Things? So I'm quite keen to hear how you expect this to play out. You write about these sort of companies, all-day companies that are companies that aren't. What kind of answers are you expecting to get from this? Do you think people are in the early stages or way ahead of the game?
I think very much so. Still, people are in the early stages. Yeah. And I can't stress enough. I think we're definitely past the early adoption stage. The technology's out there.
Sure.
The messaging's out there. There's guidelines. There are communities who are willing to help. And there's lots of work to be done. Standardization needs to be solved. Security issues is clearly a massive area of debate and discussion that needs more discussion. But at the same time, no, I think there are definitely companies who will be looking at it. I'd be surprised to hear that there are many who've really gone full throttle and have fully adopted it. I'd be equally surprised that other companies would say, if there's a majority of people who said, no, we're not touching it at all, that would be, I think people are definitely interested. I just hope that interest builds into actual action and people start really considering it. Otherwise, we're going to miss out on what I think could be a society-changing tech trend.
I'm going to guess some numbers. I'm going to guess 5% are actually doing it. I'm going to guess another 10% are looking at it. I'm going to guess that a further 50% are thinking about it and maybe reading about it, and the rest haven't got a clue what it is or don't care.
I'd be very surprised if anybody is not doing it at all without, they might not be knowing they're doing it, but they're definitely doing something in the Internet of Things world. I mean, there's some selection bias on our side because we are, a big data company, an Internet of Things company.
Right.
So, I see companies all the time that are doing it. When I look at our client lists, the ones in manufacturing, or if you look at companies like engine manufacturers for airplanes, for cars, for boats, for all of that, they censor these things very heavily. They capture enormous volumes of data. And, they're using that to optimize schedules, to reduce power consumption, to predict maintenance problems, and to generally provide a better service to their customers. And they use this to shift to usage-based pricing, right? Or as we're calling it now, XaaS, anything as a service. So I guess selection bias again, because we are a big data company. I think the tendency is not that the technologies don't exist. I actually find the biggest problem is companies are adopting the big data technologies, right? And the big data technologies, the core behind them is that it's low-cost computing.
Right, yeah.
Commodity, storage, low-cost computing, highly reliable, highly resilient, linearly scalable. I don't think any of the technologies are missing. Now, companies are still adopting those technologies. I really tend to think that it's the mathematics that's hasn't been adopted yet. So the Internet of Things problem, I don't think it's a technology problem. I think it's I guess applied mathematics is a version of technology. It's just not what we tend to think of as technology.
Yes, and by that, are we talking having machine learning that kind of automates the whole process, or the right algorithm in place? How do you see
So
this?
I mean, we have some we have some approaches to AI, machine learning. These buzzwords fly around. We have some of them that are fairly deterministic, where we have known formulas, things where we're doing linear logistic regression, where we know that this is the output that we're trying to optimize, and we can write it out as a cost formula that we're trying to optimize or maximize or minimize, which becomes basically a calculus problem. We have things like that. Then we have other techniques like machine learning, where we say, well, we want to mimic what we believe. I don't believe it, but what we believe methods that the brains use, right? That our brain has an outcome, right, and it kind of learns how to weight different neurons, different inputs, without having a determined formula for it. I think those are all what we're waiting to improve now, right?
Yeah.
What we're calling deep learning nowadays.
There's again, I think the natural evolution of the IoT, whether it's at an early stage or a later stage, is to have that kind of those systems. Again, not the hardware, the software, effectively the AI, the machine learning, that kind of starts automating all of this. But I would sort of argue that even we might not have those algorithms in place, but even if you've got all this data feeding into, say, a central pool, you've got visual analytics, you've got just access to the data, and a clear objective on how you're going to use it in a business way or a way to enhance society.
I think that's the part where that you just took a huge leap right there, and a clear objective, right?
But I think even if you've got people who are carrying out almost analysis as they go along, rather than say having the kind of the automation and that sort of things, isn't that not still a positive step towards it?
Well, it might be a positive step.
It's happening anyway, isn't it? And it always will. Technology advances every year.
But just as a reality, I mean, we shouldn't fool ourselves into thinking that you can eyeball a complex relationship between 5 variables, much less 50,000 variables. And if you were managing the Internet of Things at the individual level, let's say for traffic in London, are we going to imagine that we can manage traffic at the 6 million variable level? No. I think it's a fantasy.
I've actually got a little cautionary tale here about an early adopter who we interviewed as part of our research earlier this year. And this was a guy in retail, and he says, our chairman is an extremely high risk taker, and his view of things is to be 2 steps ahead of where technology is going to be. So we implemented a project, and we called it the Internet of Things project, but it wasn't great. We're the early starters, and that's where we got it wrong. We thought we were doing something for the warehouse, and then we realised we're touching the vendors, and then we're touching the consumers. And what had happened was, this sort of fantastic new scheme that they built in the warehouse didn't talk to the ERP system, it didn't talk to the e-commerce system. It just created a huge mess. It was expensive, it used up loads of people's time, even though the sensors themselves were quite cheap. Just trying to get this thing working was so incredibly expensive. Eventually they dropped it, and they said, well, we made a mistake, we went too early. So you certainly can go too early. You need to think it through first of all. You need to have a proper use case and then think, what's the technology that can solve it, rather than what you seem to be doing, which is saying, hey, look at all this fantastic technology, what can we use it for, I
definitely think you need a use case. You need to start from A, what technology do I need, and then sort of jump straight through to Z, going, what do I want out of this? Or start from Z and work back to A. Then I think where you've got to be sensible is figuring out how you implement it in the right way. But I think yes, projects can go wrong, but then anything can go wrong. An aggressive move into a new market can go wrong.
Timing is everything, though, surely.
There is certainly an element, but I think, as Miles said, we have the technology now. Yes, we're lacking certain sort of, mathematical elements and algorithms to really make sense of this huge deluge of data, but there's still, again, particularly on a small scale, and I think that actually comes down to how we define the Internet of Things. It can, obviously, I would love to see this interconnected world where everything is made efficient, from aircraft to everything. And
this issue of made efficient, I think that's fraught with all sorts of problems. What is efficient? Yeah,
well, I think I'm probably seeing it more almost that kind of that science fiction level where everything's smooth and running, we're all glistening, pollution-free cities. Yeah. But at the same time, I think the Internet of Things, or I can call it in terms of the network of things, where we have got all these sensors and we do, or businesses, or groups of businesses all look at how they can kind of adopt a certain platform or create something where all this data is coming in and they can make sense of it all. It is a risk, definitely, but I think it's just as big a risk if you step back and go, you know what, I'm happy having maybe wasting a load of energy, or having vehicles that are taking the wrong goods a much further route round, wasting a load of fuel.
No one's happy.
Can I ask a question here? Because John, it sounds to me like you're actually saying businesses should not have an R&D department.
No,
Right? This is an R&D function,
Yes,
right?
I agree.
Whenever you embark on something that you don't know the outcome, where you don't have a clear business case,
Yeah,
that's an R&D function, we call it, right?
yeah.
If we can't even envision a business case, then it's pure science, pure discovery function, and maybe businesses aren't very
I say
well
that's
placed for that.
that's an absolutely fair point. That's a fair point. But then, in this case, they shouldn't have put it into production. They should maybe have tested it on a small sort of test run first of all, and then see how it goes, rather than, you know, obviously this chairman guy is just a complete sort of zealot, a bit like
That was
Roland.
mismanagement, it sounds like, right?
Yeah, probably, yeah.
I sort of agree. Yeah, there definitely should be a test environment. It's like any kind of R&D in some technology. But I think if you step back and people are going to go, you know what, I don't want to invest. I don't want to dedicate my R&D resource into that. I want to still keep, I don't know, finding a new ERP system, or I want to find out how to interconnect all this stuff together. I think they do need to start looking at it or very seriously considering, where can we channel the R&D resources into this? What can we do to really find out the potential here? I don't think you should go and spend millions and completely bankrupt yourself. And in that, I would argue that the case you brought up was, again, it's very, very reasonable. But I can't imagine there's going to be huge amounts of people out there. Maybe, but at the same time, I think we live in a society now where fail fast is meant to be a good thing to invent. Silicon Valley, and I think we should
wrong with that
embrace that attitude.
In this particular case, I wonder if they didn't learn something very valuable from that.
Yeah.
We say it failed, but we don't, the rollout failed or whatever, I don't know the details of the case. It failed, but it depends what you're defining failure as. Maybe it succeeded brilliantly. They found out that some certain thing can't be done. Their current method is optimal. Who knows?
You can learn through failure, absolutely. I'd like to come back to money, which is what you talked about there. Now, let's say the number of connected things is increasing by 30% every year. Now, all those things have to be maintained, which doesn't come for free. So even though the sensors might be a few pence each,
Right.
and even though you can store your data in Hadoop and commodity services, and that's all pretty cheap, somebody has to maintain these things. Somebody has to upgrade all the software on them. Somebody has to replace them when the batteries run out, or possibly replace the batteries depending on what the actual thing is. So while the costs of doing that aren't going to go up by 30%, probably it'll be less than that, they are going to go up, especially probably with security, which I hopefully we'll come on to a bit later. So that also needs to be factored into any plan to roll out the Internet of Things.
Sure, but that's true of everything we do, right?
Yeah.
If we buy new cups for a store, we think about the cost of replacing cups.
We're talking about sort of exponential change, though, and
You think
probably
it is?
not probably the looking after of it is, probably the ensuring security is, and the.
I think you're actually
maintenance
going
of
to find. Sorry to interrupt you there.
That's okay. No,
I think what
fine.
we're actually going to find is that companies, let's say they go out there and they put sensors on everything. I don't think any company would go out there and put every type of sensor on everything they have, but let's envision the company that does that. Rather than seeing the cost of maintenance on every one of those every year grow, and inflation and the cost of upgrading and all of that, what they're going to find is as they work out the formulas and the mathematics of it and find out how to optimize things, they're going to find that of those 700,000 sensors they have, 200 of them act as sufficient proxies for the entire system, and they can get rid of the vast majority of them.
Yeah.
So I think what they're going to find out in the end is that they actually don't need much of that there are great proxy variables out there that can represent the entire system quite well, or good enough for now, let's say.
Cool. So on that note, I'm just going to head back to our first poll and see what the results were. So we asked how many of you are currently implementing IoT solutions, and you were kind of spot on. It's pretty much an even split between people saying, yeah, in the early stages, or no, but we are going to eventually. Nobody said that they didn't see any value in doing so, though.
Would have made us all look foolish.
Yeah, they would. So now I know you mentioned a moment ago you were hoping to talk about security, so I'm going to turn our attention to that now with the second viewer poll. So what do you and your business think is the biggest issue surrounding the Internet of Things? So the issues here are, Obviously, security and privacy concerns, the costs involved, which we just discussed, a lack of relevance and use cases, lack of expertise and staffing, and the little understanding of the technologies themselves. So I'm guessing you think security is going to probably come out on top here?
Has got to be the big one. I think we covered Bruce Schneier yesterday, basically sort of saying that this thing can't just be left to individual developers because there's too much at stake. When everything's connected to the internet, potentially hackers can hack a heart, defibrillator or something in a hospital, So this all has to be very well thought through, and it's widely acknowledged, I think, that the reason that the current, if you like, two-dimensional internet is insecure is because it was never designed to do what it does today. It was never designed for e-commerce. It was designed for scientists to share information, basically, in its early days. So the good thing is people are talking a lot about security of the Internet of Things, so hopefully we will find a way to build the security in. It's not easy at all, but at least people are thinking about this now. One of the difficulties is that the sensors pass tiny little packets of information between each other, so you can't encrypt that because the encryption becomes bigger than the packet size. Now, whether a temperature reading needs to be encrypted is another matter. This is going to be, this is where it all gets very, very complicated and depends on the context and the use case. But it is going to be a major issue.
Well, you don't encrypt the temperature.
You wouldn't do that.
You
no.
encrypt by changing the frequency, right?
Mm-hmm.
You do think there's other things.
The actual reading though, the actual packet wouldn't be encrypted.
Right, I'm not too worried about that because you can do that through frequency hopping things. There's other techniques for that,
Okay.
but I understand what you mean.
Okay. I think another story that we covered yesterday was I think only 10% of consumer IoT devices are thought to have adequate security. So your average sort of hacker couldn't break into them with any ease, basically.
I'd agree. I think security will come out on top on this poll. It's interesting you mentioned the Bruce Schneier story, but the flip side now sort of in his keynote, and yet he basically said that this was a problem, but you need to start addressing it early. And one of the big involvements is you can't just you can't let coders or programmers go and code the world. They need to have some kind of they need to be sort of reined in a little bit. I think this is this whole idea that where everyone needs to start looking at IoT, everyone needs to start looking at adopting it, because it's that idea we all need to, and I think it's when you mentioned it earlier, we need to get this right, and we need to get it right the first time round, because eventually the IoT, when it's fully realised, whether it's 10 years to even 100, 200 years down the line, if something goes wrong and suddenly you get access to everything, then you can actually cause real serious damage, both to society, to individuals, physical damage. But at the same time, he said governments will need to get involved in this. Businesses will need to work with governments. Everyone needs to be pulling in the direction. And you have got IoT foundations and organisations that are working on this.
Yeah, there's hundreds of them.
Yeah, so I think
There's one in the EU has one that has a huge fund associated with it covering the entire EU.
Yeah, and I think that's why everyone needs to kind of take this step almost together. And okay, I'm not expecting rival companies to be working with each other.
They are. I mean, think about like groups like the All Join Initiative, where you have manufacturers around the world who are getting together to say, they're building ontologies for different devices. Like, a washing machine. What is a washing machine? Well, it could do this, it can do that.
Yeah.
They all have this setting, they all have that setting, or lighting, for instance, right? What are the parameters of lighting? So competitors are absolutely getting together. The same way companies like Microsoft and Apple, Microsoft and Apple are a peculiarly bad example to give, but theoretically they work together.
There are these consortia, and eventually we'll have to have a kind of a platform that everyone agrees on, as happened with the oldie worldy internet. The same thing happened there, and then the W3C came together and put some standards together that we use to this day, and they're another body which is looking at it too. But there are consortia of corporations who are directly competing with each other on the protocol. So you have let me think of the names. Sigfox and so you got Bluetooth and you got Zigbee and Z-Wave or Z-Wave. Sigfox,
are
LoRa. I mean, yeah, that they don't talk to each other at all.
Well, it's not
so
just that.
one of them will
don't
win.
work with TCP either. Many of them don't go, you can't even go over the internet. They actually need gateways to get to the internet.
Yeah, yeah.
What I was sort of trying to envisage really is that people need to start while the sort of Internet of Things is still
While it's
quite
insecure,
small.
we should adopt it.
No, while it's while there's still small networks where the scope of a security attack, say we're still at testing, the R&D phase, where a scope of an attack or a breach is not going to be catastrophic. So, for instance, you take
There would never be an attack on such a network, right? You would never attempt attacking a network that the scope for damage or the scope for profit from attacking it would be low.
Yeah.
You're talking about setting up honeypots and things like that.
Well, no, I more think the Mitsubishi Outlander attack. Well, they worked out that they could kind of, I think it's a company called Pen Test Partners, worked out that they could hack the car remotely and turn off its alarm systems, break into it, and steal it. And yeah, that's a small use case. And that is technically kind of the IoT on a small level. And I think companies just start looking at those things, not be put off with it, but look at it, see, and kind of experiment with it where no one's life is going to be in danger. Sure, okay, yeah, you were going to lose a...
Yeah, but you know what, Holden, the same thing was checked. The Jeep Grand Cherokee and Tesla, I remember, were both hacked. I don't remember which one it was, but they found they could actually activate the brakes.
Yeah.
They could lock the steering wheel.
But what I like that is we're finding this out early on. So I'm not saying, so that's what I'm saying, I'm kind of encouraging this idea that we start testing it now, rather than suddenly going, the next thing you know, we've all got these driverless cars that are interconnected and someone leaves a vulnerability there, and suddenly you've got people who've had their cars hacked and ploughed off the motorways.
I actually don't think...
Smaller problems that can be addressed or identified, then addressed at the earlier stages.
The thing is, it doesn't actually stand still. You don't have a security thing that you start identifying all these vulnerabilities. They change all the time.
But it's more identifying how you go about addressing, how you mitigate them, how you prepare for such problems, how you develop standards around them.
I'm not even worried about those cases, though. Those kind of cases with safety in cars, those are actually the last ones I'm worried about, because, like, literally nobody profits. I mean, you know, theoretically, the car manufacturer might profit from getting their cars into wrecks, but it's hard to imagine, you know, a car company going out there and sabotaging their own vehicles. Those are not the ones I'm worried about. The ones I'm worried about are surreptitious attacks where, you know, God, I don't even know where to start here, where they change masses of things to increase fuel consumption or you know, I don't know where to start. There's a million things. I'm worried about the attacks that are quiet and siphon off 0.5% of the cost every day.
Yeah.
Right? The attacks that happen and you would never know even after you were hacked.
So, I mean, you could argue that's the internet as it is at the moment, and people are not stopping creating digital services just because there are still vulnerabilities. I mean,
because there's no connection back to the physical world right now. I mean, when we talk about the Internet of Things, we talk about what I usually talk about, like 5 C's. I talk about a smart connection, a conversion of data to information, a centralization of data, or place where we can work with it all together. A configuration, finally, it's called cognition, and basically continuous improvement at the end. Up in the internet to now, we basically had it only up to the cognition phase. We have not done the phase where we take the cyber systems and feed them back into the physical world. Yeah. That's the difference now, and I think that's what makes it the vulnerability much more dangerous. I mean, to some extent, this has been a risk with banking. Right,
that's what I was going to raise, yeah.
Right, that's okay. That I agree is the exception. That one I'm not too worried about, only because it's pretty easy to discover when failure happens, right?
I would sort of argue there's a sort of flip side to that. Then, is if we say, okay, well, the security is such a problem. We don't want any connected cars. We don't want driverless cars. We don't want that. I would imagine that there are far more lives will be saved overall, net sort of figures, by having driverless cars, by having these systems in place, rather than at the risk of someone hacking into a car and causing great problems, or having something that causes physical damage, or surreptitiously raising fuel consumption or electricity consumption in a lot of cases. The net benefits to society could be stronger. But I think, again, and I'm going back to the idea, if we start looking at this early on, rather than if people stand back and let a couple of companies go and create the platforms of the future, they're defining that, and if they get it wrong, no one else has worked with them to kind of figure out how to get it right. I think
I think there are hundreds of companies doing that. Many companies are building specialized platforms. GE has one. In fact, our company Hitachi has one. IoT platforms that are designed for this. I mean, to be clear here, I'm actually on your side in general here on this argument. But I am concerned.
Well, I think
we all are.
For the naysayers out there, really, who go, no, we're not touching it until we know everything's perfect. I think that would be the wrong thing to do. I think you'd be limiting yourself, and you'd be limiting your involvement with, as you say, with all the consortia and all these companies who are involved in it. I think it's better to be involved in it and take the risk than it is to be left behind.
I don't think anyone's saying that. It's more when's the right time. I mean, there's no such thing as 100% security anyway. It's impossible. So you have to say, well, when's the right time? When it seems that these things have sort of come together properly. You know, there's no danger of this platform suddenly not being supported, this company going bust, leaving us, you know, without any software updates for all this stuff that we bought. You know, so it's when does that happen? And it feels to me, without any evidence at all, it feels to me that it's kind of all over the place at the moment, and it's not there. 2 years' time, maybe it will be, you know.
So what would you see as your sort of ideal point where you would flip your argument then, and you would say, right, IoT has got to a point where it's mature enough where we can, where everyone should adopt it. How do you envisage your sort of perfect?
First, you'd have to define what you mean again by IoT, but getting away from that rather tedious semantic argument. I suppose when the platforms for whatever I happen to want to do, but let's say...
Who are you waiting on then?
Who am I waiting on? I'm waiting on governments and the big corporations like the Intels and whatever to agree on some sort of basic kind of standard ways of doing things. It's going to depend on what I want to do, of course, you know, but let's say I'm in health or something, okay, so there has to be very, very strong data protection built in it. These systems can't sort of leak this stuff out into the internet. The actual connection to the internet must be done in a very standard way that, you know, fits regulations, and accountability has to be clear. So if it does go wrong, who picks up the pieces? You know, is it going to be me, or is it going to be the platform provider?
That's a worry in general in the machine learning world, right? Or we think about autonomous cars again.
Yeah.
When the car wrecks, who's at fault? An autonomous car is Google's driverless car.
Another thing that comes into that actually is the argument that, do you think in 10 years' time we'll be able to drive? Because we will be worse drivers than the driverless cars, so maybe humans won't be allowed to drive anymore.
Makes sense. I believe that. Maybe not 10 years, maybe 15 or 20, but actually again, the bigger problem I worry about is what happens when somebody does get killed by a car. Do they go put Larry Page and Sergey Brin in prison, or who goes?
I wouldn't have thought so.
Who gets blamed for it?
But this is, again, I think your point on when to adopt is a very sensible argument.
Thank you, Nolan.
You're most welcome. To smaller companies, definitely. But again, I keep going back to the same point, and I think the driverless cars is a good example. No one's figured it out yet. Who takes liability? What goes on?
The actual technology for driving the car actually is it's pretty well. But
they're still testing it. I mean, driverless cars are due to be tested on roads this year. I mean, earlier on this year, I went to Google campus. I saw one of them zipping around.
They've been doing it in Nevada and California for a couple of years.
But no one knows what happens when it actually, if it does have to plough down or has to choose between crashing into another car or crashing into a pedestrian. No one knows that situation. But they need to experiment, and they need to be out there doing this thing. Not directly, not in quite so literal terms. But I mean, you could say it's about medicine. I mean, people need to go out there and test medicine, find out, be innovative. And you don't want every single. I'm not saying that every single company needs. Waterstones, for instance, maybe doesn't need to kind of connect sensors to its books to find out who's taking them off the shelves. But there's a lot of companies that really stand to benefit this and should be involved in it.
Waterstones would be one that might actually. Retail's quite a big use case, and they are doing that now.
I can't think of certain retailers. I mean, obviously, retail's a vast space, but there's clothing and particularly ones that revive or rely on a lot of branding and experience-based sort of shopping. There's huge amounts of potential for that.
Absolutely.
But I just think that people need to kind of just figure it out, rather than standing back and waiting for something to happen. Otherwise, the platforms they might want might never be made. And that would be a sad thing for us to miss out on this whole potential that when the concept of the IoT actually becomes a thing,
I agree.
is gathered together.
When we're talking about the problems of liability of driverless cars. I mean, that pales into insignificance than when we're talking about smart cities, where you're going to have literally thousands of different actors all involved. You might have a big systems integrator running stuff like IBM or Fujitsu or whatever, you know, sort of coordinating all the stuff. You've probably got your company joining all the stuff together. It's like, who is sort of liable for anything that goes wrong there?
So what we do,
who actually owns the data at the end of the day as well? That's another big.
We're working on it with a group. We're doing the City of Copenhagen's Open Data Exchange, and that is, you know, kind of a precursor, a first stage to a smart city. And you know, the way we've looked at it now, obviously privacy is a huge concern, but it's mostly about companies or groups that want to publish non-personal data, can put it up there, and other groups can subscribe. And I think that's the slow adoption model.
Yeah.
Figure out. Right now, it's not providing a service. I agree. When there's millions of actors, how do you assign liability? How do you protect things? I'm worried about that as well.
So on that note, I'm just going to share we've gone off on a bit of a tangent now, but I'll share the results of our last poll. And we've been talking about all these security issues for the past 15 minutes, but our viewers don't seem to think that's a problem. They've said that the costs involved in implementing is one of the biggest issues, and a lack of expertise in staffing. So there you go. We've actually run out of time. So I'm going to share the results of our poll that we've been running all week. So Roland has been arguing that the IoT is an existential threat to those who are slow to adopt it, whereas John has been arguing that no, it's not. It's all just marketing hype. So how do you think the vote's gone? Who do you think's going to come out on top? Yeah.
I think existential threat would have won, probably by, let's call it 7%.
Close. So Roland's argument did win with 53% of the votes. John got 47%. It's so close. I guess that shows that there's a lot of hype around it. There's a lot of issues around it. But at the end of the day, businesses do need to at least start looking at it.
You know, companies don't always get polling right, though.
No. Well,
That was a terrible joke.
So on that note, thank you very much for watching our latest Inquirer debate, and you'll be able to find all of our content on the Inquirer website.